My name's Jamie McMahon, and I've chosen to talk tonight about the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is the amendment that says pretty much that power is not given to the national government in the Constitution of the United States are reserved to the states unless they are denied the states. This has been a constant battle throughout the history of the United States. One of my sources I'm using tonight is Government in America. I am actually a teacher of AP Government, and this is the textbook that I use in my classroom. So this is one of my favorite books for something like this. The battle has constantly been between the Supremacy Clause and the 10th Amendment. 10th Amendment saying the states have the rights to these powers, and the Supremacy Clause saying that the laws of the national government and stuff in the Constitution is the supreme law of the land. The first time this really came to a head was a court case, McCulloch versus Maryland, when the United States created a second bank of the United States. Baltimore tried to tax the second bank of the United States, and then ended up saying, well, the United States did not have a right to do that because that power is not granted to them in the Constitution. Goes to Supreme Court. Supreme Court rules that the federal government does have certain implied powers. That's a big victory for the Supremacy Clause for the federal government against the states. Probably the biggest battle ever in this back and forth tug of war was the Civil War, where the question of secession was finally answered. A state cannot leave just because they do not agree with the federal government's laws, proceedings, things like that. There have been tons of court cases over the 10th Amendment, and this has been, like I said, a back and forth issue really since the very beginning. One side pulling a little ahead and then the other. National League of Cities versus Ussery in 1976 said the federal government could not pass labor laws such as a minimum wage on state employees, that was an infringement of states' rights. That was flipped back over just 9 years later in 1985 in Garcia versus San Antonio Metro. U.S. v. Lopez was another one where the United States government said that schools could not have guns at school. That was overthrown in 1990 and said that that was a state issue. The civil rights era is another big thing with the 10th Amendment. Does the federal government have the right to step in and tell the states how to govern themselves? Many other things today are that way. Same-sex marriage, abortion, fiscal federalism, all of those things are other issues that are going to come up. Now, fiscal federalism, I read about this in an article called "It's Time to Reclaim the 10th Amendment" by Sherman Packard. In this, it talks about the new way that the federal government is using to try to control the states, something called fiscal federalism, using money. They take tax money and then promise it to give back to the states in a grant, and then they will pass certain mandates and tell the states, you have to do this if you want our money. If the states do refuse, then they don't have to do it. The federal government cannot make them do it. It's not constitutional to make them do it, but they will withhold the money. This article said that currently it's about $800 billion a year that they are passing back to the states to follow mandates. This has been done in things like No Child Left Behind, Common Core, even with the mandate of President Obama a couple weeks ago about bathroom of choice and things like that in schools. These are where they have tried to use fiscal federalism to control schools throughout the United States. And you might say, well, how much funding are they actually giving the schools? Well, in another article called Education in the U.S. and Netherlands, an Equity Comparison by William Owings, Leslie Kaplan, Monique Volman, this was something that they talked a little bit about how funding works in the United States. Practically 43.8% of funding in the United States for schools comes from the local level, 43.5% from the state level. The federal government provides 12.7% of the funding for schools throughout the United States. Now, this is an interesting issue where you really bring up the 10th Amendment. How much right does the federal government actually have to get involved in schools? Some people say not at all, because they say education is not mentioned in the Constitution, therefore the federal government has no power and the Department of Education is unconstitutional. Other people say, well, that's part of those implied powers that they do. But right now, pretty much the federal government has gained control of schools through No Child Left Behind, through Common Core, by using money to get control, get their foot in the door, but yet they're only providing about 12.7% of the funding. Thank you.